This is their truth, and how dare you poke around and question it? Well, I'm poking. Poke right between the eyes. I'm questioning. I hope to be a poking, annoying thorn in the side of this aggressive agenda, and I will go down fighting, not letting my kids being taken captive by it. Get off my lawn. Okay, first, right off the bat, I just want to be clear that I understand that not every parent can homeschool. I know that there are many parents who wish that they could. So I am not here to shame you or make you feel bad that you cannot do that. That is not what this video is about at all. All I'm going to do in this video is explain my journey with this in hopes that it will help other parents and hopefully open eyes to this situation in general. Second, some clarity. We always plan to homeschool at some point. Specifically before middle school. This was not a sudden decision for my oldest, but it was for our youngest. There were always many reasons why we wanted to eventually homeschool. It was always the plan. But what played a major role in me homeschooling both of my girls sooner than decided, however, had to do with me reading a book that really helped me grasp and understand what is going on in our nation right now when it comes to gender ideology. It was the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Shrier. Her book is about the transgender craze seducing our daughters and our boys even. Now, I know from previous videos that some of you have read this book. I would probably guess that most people haven't, but to give you some idea of what this book is about, I'm going to read the description. I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm going to read just part of it. Until just a few years ago, gender dysphoria, which meant severe discomfort in one's biological sex, was vanishingly rare. It was typically found in less than 0.01% of the population, emerged in early childhood, and afflicted males almost exclusively. But today, whole groups of female friends in colleges, high schools, and even middle schools across the country are coming out as transgender. These are girls who had never experienced any discomfort in their biological sex until they heard a coming out story from a speaker at a school assembly or discovered the internet community of trans influencers. Unsuspecting parents are awakening to find their daughters in thrall to hip trans YouTube stars and gender-affirming educators and therapists who push life-changing interventions on young girls. Coming out as transgender immediately boosts these girls' social status, Shrier finds. But once they take the first steps of transition, it is not easy to walk back. She goes on to explain that she wrote this book to know how we can protect our daughters. And I would honestly say that this is for the boys as well. Now, as I mentioned before, when I read this book, I felt so convicted to pull out both of my girls. And again, I want to stress that this may not be what every parent decides to do or even can do, but for me, I knew this was the right thing for us. And also, no, this is not a Christian book, but it was a starting point for me to really understand this cultural craze when it comes to adolescent girls suddenly wanting to change the very fabric of their identity because of a social contagion. In fact, if I'm perfectly honest with you guys, I was extremely intrigued that this wasn't a Christian book. We do this in apologetics, reading another perspective outside of Christianity that helps affirm it. Well, in this case, reading a non-Christian perspective about gender ideology was very beneficial. This book kept coming up within, my social circles in this last year, and it was when Greg Koukl mentioned it, someone I highly respect, that I decided to actually read it. Now, because it's not a Christian book, I do just want to tell everyone that if you do decide to read it, there might be a few parts that are pretty forward when it comes to the language that Miss Shrier uses. So, heads up. And beyond that, of course, I have a different viewpoint of God and the nature of mankind, which I think is a huge gaping hole in this whole thing. So I would say I would disagree with her on certain things, but nonetheless, I will gladly link arms with her about the message of this book and the goal that's grounded in reality and truth. So how exactly did it play a part in me homeschooling my girls? I'm going to share 5 things that this book did for me when it comes to making this decision. And it was hard to narrow it down to 5 because this is a big book. Number one, trans ideology is a social contagion. Schools encourage it. Parents go along with it. The culture and media celebrate it. I mean, you got to be 18 to get a tattoo, 21 to drink, 16 to get a license because you're too young and dumb to make such permanent and dangerous decisions. But if you want to change your pronouns, get top surgery, take hormones that will do irreversible permanent damage to your body without your parents' knowledge or consent, then it's celebrated. That is our culture's logic today, folks. Kids don't avoid risky behaviors that their peers approve of. They embrace and adopt them. There is a social incentive to identify with an oppressed group, to identify as a victim. Suddenly, you're brave. You have a voice, and nobody can question it. Over 90% of these girls who suddenly identify in the LGBTQ crowd are white. You're an oppressor. Suddenly, you went from oppressor to oppressed by identifying as a minority group. Kids feel like they suddenly have power that cannot be taken away from them. Now, I can personally attest to this in my own state, that many kids in middle and high schools are supposedly under the LGBTQ umbrella. My oldest is 12, and I can see this stuff in her peer group. I live in New Mexico, a state that is very progressive with this kind of stuff. Many girls identify as being part of this group. It's not cool to be cisgender. This is trendy. It doesn't matter if they actually are trans, bi, or non-binary, or whatever. They have to be under the umbrella in some way because they're now a part of a tribe, a group that they feel connected to. Number two, this is in our schools, and sometimes it starts in the schools. I might have a lot to say about this one. Chapter 4 about the schools was probably the most eye-opening for me personally. Realizing that if my daughters were at school at some point, whether mid or high, and wanted to change their pronouns or even get hormones at some point, she could do so without parental consent. Schools across America are teaching as young as kindergarten that biological sex and gender are separate. How in the world did this even get into our schools, though? And what I found stunning is a twist that I never expected. A lot of this is because of gender activists. They supply the curriculum, the speakers, and teacher training for schools. There's the genderbread person, gender unicorn, and much more that are introduced to our kids. And this is interesting because scientifically speaking, this is garbage, and they know it. This is political, not scientific. But nobody will say no to this. This is a social justice matter. So if you get in the way, you're made out to be in the way of progress and true equity and equality. You can't just listen to your kids anymore. You must agree with them. Now, the schools aren't forcing this ideology, but they are definitely creating an environment where it's basically an LGBTQ plus safe house. And I commend the schools that are fighting this. For most, though, this is enticing. It's like joining an elite club. There's a sense of moral superiority where you feel like a civil rights leader. You're an activist. Another aspect that I found very surprising is that this is harbored under the purpose of anti-bullying. This is the package that this stuff came in to get in the schools. This is morally appealing, and parents who are immersed in their kids' safety find that this is really hard to resist. They're told that this will protect their children. Educators and activists would claim that all of this gender identity education was necessary to prevent bullying, oppression, and to protect the mental health of LGBTQ children. I mean, how about we just teach kids not to be jerks? Nobody is saying that there hasn't been terrible treatment of those in this community or any community, but the remedy for all of this is just all wrong. In fact, the wording that Abigail Schreier uses to describe this is an excess of remedy. Is it too much of a challenge to teach kids decency, kindness, and respect to their fellow students, like the golden rule kind of stuff? No, they want everyone to become a part of this community in order to remedy bullying. In other words, get a load of this. Nobody is going to make fun of the LGBTQ kid if everyone is an LGBTQ kid. Here's a great perspective from the book. I put a star by it, very much agreeing with this point. This is on page 73. The proof is simply how bullying would be handled in any other context. If a Thai kid were being picked on because she arrived to school wearing a cultural sash across her torso and those traditional blousy pants, it's inconceivable that the school board would mandate that every student learn the Y-pressed palm greeting, or insist students learn the history of King Rama, or offer lessons about desire being the source of human suffering merely because Buddhist belief holds this to be true. But instead, bullying is used as an excuse for a thorough indoctrination in gender ideology, and the insistence that transgender students must be affirmed or suffer a steep psychological toll. Their remedy for bullying is just make everybody the same so that nobody's bullied. Many schools look at it as they're there to protect the student, not the parent. Now, she ends the chapter talking about safety. And again, I'm just going to read this to you because she says it better than I can. There are endless forms of abuse, it seems, invented by the gender ideologues. There is even spiritual abuse, using spiritual beliefs to justify abuse by forcing others to adhere to rigid gender rules. Like, for example, she says, perhaps there are students who might venture, I'm a Christian. I believe you're a boy, not a girl, as you say. To them, that would be considered abuse, spiritual abuse. Now I'm going to read another paragraph down. Quote, and that's when it dawned on me what all this safety is about. Why schools must declare themselves safe zones for LGBTQ students. Why the schools have special forms on which to record new names and pronouns for transgender identified students, which they keep to themselves. Why so much vigilance is needed to ward off anti-LGBTQ bullying. Why schools sacrifice so much instructional time to the year-round celebration of outre sexual orientations and gender identities. It is because of a belief held to be self-evident by gender activists and their lackeys in the school system. Bullies are forever circling trans-identified students. They torment these kids whenever they fail to affirm them. They cruelly refuse to use the kids' new names and even sometimes reject the kids' transgender identities altogether. These bullies must be beaten back with every new LGBTQ policy. They are the barbarians outside the schoolyard gates that teachers are working so hard to fend off. Children's welfare, as defined by activists, is not their priority. These bullies, they aren't even embarrassed by their own ignorance. They really shouldn't even be considered at all, except that America's backward laws insist on allowing the intrusion. They go by the names Mom and Dad. Parents, we're the enemy. You're the bully if you don't get in line. I could probably spend a whole video on just this topic, but on to number 3. This reminds me of a cult. Ever studied cults? Ever talked to a cult member? It's as if they're speaking a completely different language and their minds are controlled by a foreign narrative that has such an ironclad hold on their thinking that getting through to them seems impossible. When you challenge them, you're the enemy. Now, my first love in ministry was learning about cults. I remember learning about the bite model from a cult expert. The bite model is a great way to show a pattern with all the cults, which is a control over behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. And there were so many parallels as I was reading that throughout this book, I wrote in the margin, that sounds kind of culty. That's kind of like a cult leader. That sounds like a cult. Wow, this sounds like a cult. Then imagine my surprise when those exact words were used by a woman in chapter 10 who detransitioned to insist that it was like escaping a cult. And I was like, that's what I said. She even used a cult term, love bombing. This is where a group overwhelms you with acceptance and love. You feel an embrace and an immense positive reinforcement from this group, and it seems like a dream. You feel like you belong. You feel home. You become agreeable, welcomed into the tribe, not realizing you're signing up for something that, if you were to later question, would cost you everything. This acceptance and love is conditional. Here's a quote from the book on page 188. The gender ideology world she inhabited was a cult, she insists, because when you're inside, you believe non-reality and you disbelieve reality. If that is not the theme of this movement, I don't know what is. Online activists and influencers are the evangelists. Gender ideology is their gospel. Transitioning is membership to their church. Cross-sex hormones are your baptism, and surgery is your salvation. You devote your life to it and never question. Wash, rinse, repeat. To this group, experience and opinions trump data and facts because experience is more authentic than that. The ones who hold the real truth are in this group. If you're in this group, you're safe. They control your behavior by shaming you for questioning or talking to others with a different opinion, especially online. You can be flagged for hateful content if you have a different opinion. They don't want to have to cancel you too, so keep in line. Number 4, this redefines reality. Critical thinking is a lost skill. Right now, our children are being taught that reality is based on what offends them. Gender-affirming activists will force you to now believe that what was up is now down, a circle is now a square, 2 + 2 now equals potato, and your girl is now a boy. This is a mental feat that everyone must submit to, even if it's not true, and even if they don't believe it. They're never allowed to voice that doubt. This is thought control if I ever saw it, and this is another reason why it's culty. You must have free speech to have free thought. If you can control what someone thinks through fear, they will never be burned enough to question when reality is distorted. You must endorse a falsehood for the sake of not being crucified by the culture. And this goes beyond someone affirming how they feel inside. This is political. If you are not an activist for the cause, then you are seen as being against it. You do not fight this, you affirm it, changing what is considered healthy and normal. Let me put this another way. This is actually an example I'm going to paraphrase that the author puts in the book. Now, let's imagine for a second that we treated anorexics this way. A 95-pound girl says, "I know I'm fat, please call me fatty." Imagine you are now encouraged to do this because the definition of fat must be modified for her supposed mental benefit. If you feel fat, then you are. I support your lived experience. Now, forget the fact that she genuinely needs help. She must be signed up for liposuction and weight loss programs. This is in essence a great example, a great parallel to what is happening to the mental health of these kids. They are no longer being treated. They're being appeased. And to that I would say, Live Not by Lies, which, by the way, is another book that should definitely be read side by side with this one. All right, here's my last thought, number 5. This is war. Parents, we are seen as the enemy if we disagree with this. We're transphobes. If one of my girls decided they were trans, I would be called every name in the book and be told that I'm somehow contributing to her depression or suicidal thoughts if I do not accept and welcome this self-diagnosis. Nobody will be on my side. The therapists, teachers, medical professionals, friends won't go against this in fear. Never mind that these girls probably have deeper issues going on, and the boys as well. These issues are totally left untreated because everybody is too scared to question if they're actually struggling with gender identity or just heard a presentation at school or watch a trans social media influencer and decided that this is what they're missing in their life. This is the answer to all their problems. This is why they feel different, which, by the way, every teenager feels different and left out. This is their truth, and how dare you poke around and question it? Well, I'm poking. Poke, 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 poke. Right between the eyes. I'm questioning. Poke. I hope to be a poking, annoying thorn in the side of this aggressive agenda, and I will go down fighting, not letting my kids being taken captive by it. Get off my lawn. Fight me. So, those are very condensed reasons, just a little bit. There's a lot more I could say on how this book played a part and why I decided to pull both of my kids out of school and homeschool them. Part of my goal in doing this is not to keep them from it, actually. Some might be surprised that I will say this, but I want to expose them to it. I want to have all the talks in the world about this. Give it to me. Let's talk about this. Put it all out on the table. I want to expose them to this cultural trend and more, not just this. There's a lot more things that we talk about and will discuss other than this. But I want to talk about cultural trends and everything in a place where they're allowed to ask questions without the pressure of conforming to it. Hence, they not be labeled intolerant or a bully. Parents out there who are having to deal with this in your schools, I join hands and hearts with you in praying for your kids. My advice is to not shelter them from this. It's here. And if we do not teach them about this and inoculate them from it, then someone else will. This is kind of what happens with kids who don't know about how to defend their faith and then they go off to college. They don't know how to handle those things. They don't know how to handle the questions being asked to them. Let them ask questions and hold on to truth. Hold on to reality. You do not need to go out and buy this book and read it, but we do need to know about this. I will say, of course, that it is beneficial to read this book as well as Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality. That's a great book as well to help armor up against this stuff. The cultural punishment is swift and real. And to that I say, poke, get off my lawn.